Welcome to another session and also the final session in a series of conversations that I began about 2 weeks ago, which I titled The OnlyFans Phenomenon. All good things must come to an end, and sadly, this series comes to its, I think, um, rightful end at the end of today's session. This will be a brief session, but my final session nonetheless on this series. In the session I covered previously, I spoke to men, and I held men responsible for this new phenomenon. Um, in many ways, whenever things go wrong, it means a man has been out of his place. Whenever nations start to fall, it means men collectively have been failing. So I always look to men whenever things, um, from a societal perspective, from a familial perspective, even from a community perspective, things start to go awry. Um, and so I titled today's session, Karma is a bee, Karma is a bitch. And I think at the core of the message I have to share today, there are only two things I will address. I'll beat around the bush for a while, but I think the essence of what I'm hoping to put across should be clear from the topic itself. I'm going to draw your attention to two parts of something very first time I saw that, I thought perhaps it was one of the most profound things I've ever seen. The first is a statement. Now, I understand most people do not believe in this, you might say, philosophy, but hear me nonetheless. A man is on the cross, and as he is about to breathe his last breath, he says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Very powerful, very moving. Even if you were to read the story as a fictional account, it still indicates that there was forgiveness in his heart. And here is a man who has been wronged, still interceding for those who wronged him. In many ways, I see women who are on OnlyFans, especially the younger ones, especially those producing sexual content, to be deserving of that forgiveness. And so I do not think that there is forgiveness that will be denied of any of them. Partly because for the younger ones particularly, there's been a father that failed them. And a father does not necessarily mean, I think we confuse father and dad as synonymous. Your dad is someone perhaps who is responsible for you from a guardian perspective, a stepfather, a biological father, or perhaps someone you just call dad, someone you grew up looking up to. A father, on the other hand, provides two things. One is a father is responsible for you. He's responsible for sustaining you. He's responsible for supporting you, for providing, guiding, nurturing, and loving. And that doesn't just stop at the point when you either are given away in marriage or when you become an adult. So, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And I genuinely, as I call this session to a close, I see some of these very young girls who are producing sexual content as not really knowing what they are doing, partly because there hasn't been any voice of reason supporting and nurturing that part of them that has greatness within. Now, the second part, again, goes to another story, a powerful one also. And it says, "For the sins of the fathers shall live unto the children, even up until their third and their fourth generation." I liken this, let me say that again, just in case you missed it. The sins of the father shall live up until the third and the fourth generation of the offsprings. That second part of the story, I relate to men. So the first, which has to do with forgiveness, I associate that with the women, the young women, especially on OnlyFans, who are producing sexual content for whatever reason. The second I attribute and I assign towards men, primarily because, remember, the man is the one who's responsible. As I sit here with you, and as I share and I teach, and as I communicate and converse with you, one of the reasons why we are called fathers is primarily not necessarily because society calls us fathers, or because birth certificate there is a reference to father. No, we are fathers by virtue of the function and the role we play in society. You're not just a father because you have a child, and you're not exempt from being a father because you don't have a child. If you take responsibility, you play that role of father. But fundamentally, the reason why you are called father, especially irrespective of age, 16, 17, you can reproduce and bring life into this earth by virtue of your seeds. Each and every one of us has seeds, and we will have the opportunity to burst until maybe sometimes we drop. Yes, the quality of the sperm declines, but nonetheless, every one of us as a man, we carry generations in our loins, sometimes 3, 4 generations. Hence, the sins of the fathers live up until the 3rd and the 4th generation of the offsprings that follow them. I do not support, and I would encourage young men, especially those who are forward in the age range, and to stop this resource support with regards to OnlyFans. Not because it's not a fair exchange or equal exchange, but because there is an aspect of being out of place as a man and doing wrong as a man. Fundamentally, we have a duty by virtue of our function, our role in society. We talk about the provider-protector role. One of the reasons, if you go back to caveman days, men were better hunters, were because we had several advantages biologically: bone density, facial structures, lung capacity, etc., etc., etc. We're built to be the ones who protect. The father protects the mother protects the children, and you have a hierarchy with regards to function and with regards to responsibility. In the West these days, particularly in the West, we have solved most of the issues about survival and the need for protection. So we have what I call a quasi or an alternative to protection, physical, which is the ability to provide. Most men these days are not running around being expected to go out and fight intruders. We live in a civilized society, and therefore the provision protection falls under, for most people and in most areas, falls under provision. Very important to keep in mind. The provision, protection, responsibility that men have. I talk about 6 P's: purpose, provision, protection, the priest, professing your love by and with your presence. 6 P's. Let's put purpose aside. Not every man owes another woman his purpose. So we put that aside. We then talk about protection, provision. Protection, provision fall under the umbrella in the West of provision, because if you can provide, it means you can ensure that your loved ones are in locations where there is less crime, less access to violence, and therefore you are protecting by virtue of the resources you've created. Remember, what you are, you exchange for everything you get in return through the law of compensation. And those resources are exchanged to provide a home, shelter, safe neighborhood, etc. When men exchange resources, therefore, and OnlyFans with younger women particularly, this is very important. I liken it to the whole thing of incest. Despite it not, I guess, not being seen in the same manner. In other words, what it means is that you have some level of superior power for which, rather than use it to protect and provide justly, you're using it for your selfish interest, granted, but you're using it in such a way that it creates a spiral for the woman for which she may, over the years, find herself either in mental issues, suicidal issues with pair bonding in the future, by virtue of the fact that you incentivized her behavior, you sponsored her behavior by virtue of the resources you had. So I tend to find that for the whole OnlyFans phenomenon, recognizing that the average age of the men who consume sexual, pornographic, explicit content on OnlyFans are between 35 and 44. I don't consider you to be a young man. The average age of the women who are producing content is slightly below 25. Between 23 as a median, sometimes dropping down to 19, sometimes going up to 24. Now, at 44 years, the girl in the picture in the frame is young enough to be your daughter. So you're playing a role of father by virtue of your function as a man and by virtue of your responsibility that you're given as part of your creation as a man. To then take the resources you have will be the same as taking your strength as a man and subduing a woman to satisfy your sexual urges. I could consider that incest, and I consider it to be appalling. I think it is wrong, and so I would encourage men to stop. Do not support such a movement. As a matter of fact, if you were so generous, and if you felt you wanted to play the real role of father, well, take the same amount of money, find a means to send it to the woman directly, and don't ask for sexual content. She might be in need of money. Well, support her mission, support her purpose, her vision, help her or alleviate her struggles. The £5, £10 you pay every month, send it to her directly and ask for nothing in return. In that role, you're playing father, as father should be played. But when you take the resources you have, which is the same as taking the strength and the ability to protect that you have, the advantage you have as a man, and you use it to solicit sexual information of whatever kind, that is incest, in my opinion. And you might call this digitalized incest. Yes, you're not torturing, that you're not grooming, you're not touching, you're not doing any of that, but the same effect is achieved nonetheless. When we go to prisons, one of the things that I learned many years ago was you could go into a prison and you would see people who kill people, murderers, those who kill their fathers, kill their parents, kill their loved ones, kill people in error, done crime, committed fraud, etc. Whenever someone who has committed a sin against the child, sexual abuse against the child, came into the same prison, within a few seconds, within a few days, minutes sometimes, the person was killed by one of the inmates. Why? Because even amongst people who were flawed, the one thing that was agreed was that you do not corrupt the mind of a young person. You do not push them into a place of doing things that will harm them for the rest of their lives. You would have people who have killed multiple people ranked lower than those who committed incest. Incest was the height of what was not supposed to be tolerated. And the men in the camp, the men who were inmates, would find ways to kill the person who had sexually molested a young person, boy or girl. The reason being, that stays with the child for life. You've destroyed the child's life. I think this OnlyFans phenomenon, we will come to see in 20, 30, 40 years how so many people's lives were ruined. So I would say as follows: men, do better. There is a generational curse that awaits you. In many ways, every action you take, we never make decisions alone. Whenever you sign up and you pay for that subscription, the loins in your seed are with you at the time. This is why sometimes when we suffer as men, and we look to the left and we look to the right, and we're trying to understand, where is the suffering come from? What have I done? Sometimes it goes back to your forefathers, 2, 3, 4 generations prior. Some of the behaviors and the struggles we have as men and as women come from our fathers. So as a man, the more you support this enterprise, the more you continue to use your resources in such a manner, what you're simply doing is transferring some of the karma that will come to you to those that may follow you. Now, you might say, well, I don't have any plans to have children. But that's not a valid argument, because I said at the start, you're not a father by virtue only of the fact that you reproduced, and you're not exempt from being a father by virtue of the fact that you haven't reproduced. You're a father based on the function and the role in your purpose as a man. It's inherent in you. So, be careful about the decisions you make, especially men. I would suggest to you, I would rather have young men in that 35 to 44 age group, if you so desire, if there are sexual urges you have, and you do not want to go out and contend with the world, I would rather have you watch porn for free online, rather than subscribe to the pages of young girls who have been influenced into doing and making decisions against their long-term potential and future, because there's a resource, a carrot being downward in front of the young girls' face. Many of these young girls do not have good fathers. Some didn't even have fathers. Many of them are not able to discern. They lack the knowledge. In many ways, you're taking advantage of their lack of wisdom. You are taking advantage of their lack of experience. You're taking advantage of their lack of discernment by virtue of the resources you have. Now, you might think it's only £5 per month. Fine. In the same way, the sins of the fathers, whatever the amount and your influence may have been, will come onto you up until the third and the fourth generation of the loins that come from you. Karma awaits those who know better but refuse to do better. Now, I'm going to leave, especially the ladies, with what I shared at one of the sessions I did many sessions ago. It's an extract from a great writing from a poem called Desiderata. Beautiful poem. I'm going to leave you with the following, and this are the last two paragraphs. It says, beyond a wholesome discipline, be gentle with yourself. Beyond the wholesome discipline, be gentle with yourself. You are a child of the universe, no less than the trees and the stars. You have every right to be here. And whether or not it is clear to you, no doubt the universe is unfolding as it should. Therefore, be at peace with God, whatever you conceive him to be. And whatever your labors and aspirations, in the noisy confusion of life, keep peace in your soul. With all its sham, drudgery, and broken dreams, it is still a beautiful world. Be cheerful, strive to be happy. Let me thank you for staying with me during these sessions that I've covered. I haven't enjoyed it, I have to say. At my core, I see myself as you might say, one of Britain's original feminists. I support the suffragette movement, which fundamentally was about choice, female choice, ability to choose. And so I support women's freedom to choose. If you want to be an OnlyFans performer, an artist, that is great. But in the same way, I would also like you to think about your long-term success and not to trade off short-term gain, monetary gain, for your long-term mental health, peace of mind, and long-lasting success. And to the men, if it's come across as being too harsh, well, take it from a big brother, someone who cares, and someone who has lived long enough to know that we sow what we always reap what we sow. But here is perhaps the most painful part of the whole statement about sowing and reaping. We never reap exactly what we sow. So for some reason, it tends to be much more. The seed itself does not discriminate. The soil does not discriminate against the seed. So whether it is good seed you sow or bad seed you sow, the harvest awaits. And the harvest tends to be much more. Sometimes it comes in 60% extra, 100%, but it comes back much more. And so when we're dealing with matters that could have negative harvests, it's important to err on the side of caution and minimize what you're doing, because the harvest will be plentiful. And because there will be very few laborers, it would mean you alone, your loins, to the third and the fourth generation might be the ones who actually get to pay the price for some of the decisions you're making. I would say this in closing. If men who are subscribing to sexual content of very young girls that are online could humanize those women and could understand that that is someone's daughter and someone's mother and someone's sister, someone's nephew or niece rather, and we could humanize them, our decisions will change. The way we treat these women will change. More importantly, recognize whilst you might be doing it today, and you may not have children today, by virtue of the way the karma works, the sins that you're committing, and let me make it very clear, when I say sin, I'm not talking about some religious act. I'm saying from the term archery. The sin was a term used to say you've missed the mark. It comes from archery. One sin meant you missed the mark. And every time we miss the mark as men, the generations that follow us suffer for that. Who knows? It might be one generation, it might be 2 generations or 3, and there might be a woman in your loins. Just recognize that the chicken always comes home to roost. Now, I hope today's session has been satisfactory. The end of the session gave me an idea, an inspiration, something that I may consider dealing with in the weeks to come, and that will be speaking just to men on a number of sessions, a number of series, and I'll talk about several things: manhood, masculinity, and the need for men to return back to their rightful place, especially in society. Now, I hope today's session has been useful. Until then, I wish you all the best.